Hello there, Liz.
Good evening. Good evening, Scotland. How are you? And the rest of the UK and the world, wherever you're broadcasting to, Alistair. It's so kind of you to have me on, and thank you.
You're very welcome, Liz. You're very welcome, and thank you for agreeing to come on. And you've got a nice flag there in the background as well, which is good to see. I think we've got more Union Jacks than you in our background at the moment, but there's very few people that have got as many as us.
I can do plenty.
Oh, you good, good, excellent. Well, do you know what I'd like, please, Liz? If you could just introduce yourself briefly to the audience so that they know who you are and where you're coming from, and if you can just do that. So, what's your pedigree, as it were?
Well, I'm sad to say, for anybody that wanted to remain in the European Union, my pedigree, if you like, politics-wise, is I worked first of all with the referendum party, and then when God decided Sir James Goldsmith was wanted in heaven and not here on earth, I then joined UKIP, and I worked out in Mid Wales where I lived, and we started from naught, as you know, and our aim was to get the UK back and under the UK's control. We didn't fancy too much being under the control of other people. So I worked very hard for nearly 30 years. In part of that time, I lived in France as well, and was pleased to see that the rural French are exactly the same as the British. They hate the EU as much as we do. They don't hate. There's always this thing. It's a bit like Scotland and England. The Scots hate the English, and the English hate the Scots. Nothing could be further from the truth, really, when you get to the real people. It's the political elite, as we call them. I don't know why we call them elite, because they're far from that. But it's the political elite that cause all the problem. And so we wanted control back in this country. And I could never understand the Scottish government under Nicola Sturgeon wanting to come out of the UK, but to go into the EU, which is even further removed.
The reason they do that is just because it makes things awkward for Westminster. It's very much my enemy's enemy is my friend. Really, is the way that they look on that. And what I'd like to do, Liz, is just bring up the programme which we've got here for Saturday the 24th. And I'll just quickly run through it. People might not be able to read that, but it begins with talking about alternative media and free speech, the importance of free speech. It goes on talking about the importance of child protection, especially in Wales. And then there's someone speaking about woke in our educational institutions. And then I'm very pleased that the next three speakers, including myself, I'm glad to say, are one's from Scotland. That's me, keeping Scotland in the UK. Jason Lloyd Davies from the United in Britain, keeping Wales in the UK, and somebody from Northern Ireland to be decided. Goes on talking then about climate change, and then we're talking about the importance of cash and the dangers of central digital currency, and then going on to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, which I believe is possibly the phrase that Klaus Schwab came up with, and then finishing with the importance of individuals in the fight. Okay, so people can see there that that's hitting a lot of buttons, as it were, a lot of the sort of things that have come out, especially in the last 2 years. Can I ask you, what gave you the idea to pull something like this together in a conference?
Well, what happened after UKIP virtually finished, and of course I worked directly for Nigel Farage and then the great Gerard Batten, and so I worked at the top really, right over the referendum, etc. and since. But after that, we can all see, Alistair, what's happening worldwide. Let's forget for a minute the UK. We've got the UK ostensibly, we're out of the EU, we should all be back together. But if you look at what's happening worldwide, first of all, we had COVID, and we could all see that everybody followed across the world a pattern which we've never seen before. So most of us realised that something awful was going on that had got nothing to do with the disease. So we started something called Freedom Digital Broadcasting, and we broadcast live on television on both Roku and Amazon Fire. I'm sorry, I said live, but most of their pre-records. But I've recorded right at the very beginning some of the people that are now household names who I knew, like us, went to all the marches, etc., and knew that we were being sold a pup, if you like. So we started Freedom Digital Broadcasting, and I've got many connections. When I started my political career, I was in mid Wales, and very much like Scotland, totally rural. And so we had Wales was a branch, would you believe? Instead of you have a branch in every town, etc., the whole of Wales was a branch when I started. And I worked with a tremendous gentleman called Hugh Mulwyn Hughes. And I went down and gave a talk a few weeks ago to the Free Libertarians in South Wales. And afterwards, Hugh and I sunk a couple of bottles of wine, as you do, back at his place with his wife. And we decided that talking is now over, really, with the Great Reset and Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the Trilateral Commission. And for those of you who don't know anything about the Trilateral Commission, please look it up. And you'll see that the member that we have on it for the UK is none other than Sir Keir Starmer. And if you think you wonder why there's no opposition in Parliament, I suggest you all have a look. And then you've got things like the World Health Organization, etc., etc. But we all know about these people. We all know about their agendas, Alistair. And what we thought of was we've got to do something because the politicians aren't doing anything. If you could see the correspondence I've written over the last 3-4 years to politicians, begging them to explain to their constituents, explain in Parliament what is happening with all these agendas, climate change, etc., of which, of course, there's always been climate change, but it's nothing as we're being told. You know that, we know that. And so we came up after 2 bottles of wine at 3 o'clock in the morning with the Great Resist. So Hugh said, right, what are you going to do about it? And this was about nearly 3 months ago. So we thought, right, this is it. Now, the Great Resist, we're putting together, this is worldwide, not just for the UK, but for individuals and small or large organisations that are fighting any part of what is being thrown at us. You talked a minute ago about a do, I think, this Saturday in Glasgow, where you've got against the education indoctrination that's been with our children at the moment. Now,
Yes.
these organisations, we don't want to change them at all, and we're not in this for money or anything, but we want the umbrella of the Great Resist, and then everybody to come together under one banner, still doing everything they do. But you know, we've got Public Child Protection Wales that are speaking now. You know, at the next conference, I'd like the Scottish people to talk, but to all come together under one website, and then so that everybody can see that we're not just, you know, 2 or 3 people or 10 people or 30 people battling away in a small corner. So that's why we pulled it all together. And South Wales, because I have a lot of connections in South Wales, and they've worked so hard down there in all these small groups, Alistair. I'm fed up with everything going to London, as I'm sure you're fed up with everything going to Glasgow and Edinburgh. You know, you wouldn't think that anywhere else existed on the planet except London. And so we decided to launch in Newport at the Neon. And the Neon has got absolutely everything. It's close to the railway station. It's got all the recording. It was a cinema. It's absolutely lovely. It's got everything there that you could possibly wish for. So that's why we're launching down there. And of course, most importantly, if we get together a force for good, No Cymru, which is united in Britain, and David Vance in Northern Ireland, we have got to keep the UK together. They want to split up because, of course, if we're all split up, they can do what they like with us, and we're not having it.
Yes,
So
that's a good point. You know, sometimes you'll hear from Scottish nationalists in particular, they'll say, oh, because the Westminster politicians in some cases have made a complete hash of it, then it's better that we just break away, and as if somehow separated, we're going to make a better hash of it, and it doesn't really work that way. You have to work on the premise that politicians are mere human beings, and as we've seen this week, they get arrested regardless of where they happen to be, whether it's Holyrood or Westminster. And so the question is, it's as far as fighting these big national things are concerned, it's important to have a national centre that can stand up for them, and it's important to encourage our national members of parliament at a British level, at the big central level, at the wider level, at the pan-British level, to engage with our issues and to change things at that level. Things can be changed at that level if we simply have the people who can stand up for them. The problem is finding the politicians who are in a position, whether mentally or physically, to be able to stand up. We're very lucky. Recently we've had Andrew Bridgen, who's stood up and has been able to articulate the concerns of a lot of people. That it's not all the people with his concerns, but there's a substantial number of people who believe what he believes, and they've had no representation in Parliament whatsoever. Of 650 MPs, he is the only one strongly articulating the position that's held by a very substantial number of people in the United Kingdom. So you have to say, how does that situation come about? How is there only one man articulating that? So something is seriously wrong. So good for him for doing it, but of course he's got chucked out at the Tory party for doing it. So that doesn't set a very good precedent for anybody else who's thinking of doing that, and who, for example, may not be a person of means, and so they're relying upon their job, and so they just keep their head down and they don't rock the boat. And unfortunately, the British political system's a bit set up like that, but so is any political system, I suppose. It just depends. Do you have hope that there's going to be more people coming through who can speak to these matters?
I wouldn't hold your breath, Alistair, on that. If you saw the individual letters, because although, I've worked in London, and a lot of people know me from working with Nigel and Gerard, etc., in the House of Commons, so I'm not unknown, if you know what I mean. And I've written to all these people, begging them to stand up and, do what they should do. And they are there, to look after us and to articulate what we feel. And I think they're either bought, or they're thick, or they're both. And, I've got to that, I'm sorry, stage. And, you've got Andrew Bridgen. I should think the Tory party actually have done themselves the biggest disservice, because Andrew now standing by himself, or for Reclaim and Lawrence Fox, he can say precisely what nobody wants to hear in Parliament. So I think they've done themselves a huge disservice. But I think it's absolutely wonderful. But, there are people there at the end of their political careers that are a lot older. You've got people like Christopher Choke and Desmond Swain and Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis and John Redwood and Ian Duncan Smith. All these people, they're at the end of their political careers. So it wouldn't hurt them at all to stand up and explain exactly what's going on, why we're in the mess that we're in. Because it's quite obvious to all of us, I know it is to you because we've had this conversation, that we're not being governed properly by our own governments. They are puppets of somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's definitely that's a conclusion that you can very easily come to just by looking at the evidence on these matters. And the last 2 or 3 years really hit home as well. I remember when they were bringing in the emergency legislation for the disease that we mustn't mention on YouTube anyway, when they were bringing in the emergency legislation, everybody voted for that. Even the one or two of the Tories who had tried to develop a reputation for themselves as being sort of free-thinking libertarians, I won't mention any names, but even they voted for these emergency regulations, which were very severe and I would argue went against British values as far as things like freedom of assembly and freedom of travel and freedom of speech they definitely went against all of these three things in a very bad way. And if you, shutting the churches down, that was a terrible thing, just from a symbolic perspective as well. When I saw the government do that, it was like, that's almost like, King Herod or something like that. That's what he would do. And unfortunately, of course, many of the churches went along with it. In fact, I think virtually they all did.
But of course, they didn't want, the reason for that is they didn't want people to get together and talk so people could actually start to put a wedge in. I don't know how many of your viewers know of Pastor Arthur Pavlovsky in Canada, and he stood up and he threw the police out. Now, he's had a terrible time since. They've thrown him in and out of jail. They can't make any allegations stick. It's a bit like Trump. And he's an absolutely wonderful man. He was Polish by birth. Both he and his brother are pastors. And I thought, if only we could throw out the Archbishop of Canterbury and all the mealy-mouthed bishops that we've got and have a pastor called Arthur Pavlovsky over here in charge, we might have seen a little bit of a different outcome. And you have to go back when you look at totalitarian regimes or any of these regimes. The first thing that goes is
a lot of people just believed the fear, and that of course helped the state to do exactly what it did. And so that's another thing, people did, while the media and the government promoted the panic, it was helped by the fact that an awful lot of people actually believed it. 100% believed the worst elements of it. Many of us thought, well, let's take care and be careful and so on. But some people really did panic about it. And when you've got a substantial number of people panicking, then it introduces a new dynamic into the situation, which can make things even worse, which I think we were witnessing. I've certainly witnessed that.
But nobody was listening, Alistair, to the alternative, because you couldn't get the message out that this was all planned, etc. You've got to look at Event 201 that took place in America. Any of us that could, what upsets me is my peers that I went to grammar school with, I can't remember when they stopped learning how to read, because it's all there. And, you've only got to look at the UN's agenda 2021, 2030 and 2050. Just start there and look at the agendas and what they say they're going to do. And, as I say, it is all there. And if you look at Event 201 that they held in 2019 in America, it was the forerunner, the play of what was going to happen when the pandemic hit. What did COVID stand for? How did it come? They named it, at that time. They didn't wait for it to come out. It was all named beforehand. And then finally, there's a wonderful chap called Dr. David Martin, and I urge all your viewers to look at him. He has done more work than I did on the patents that have been taken out over the last, say, 20 years. Now, the one that astounded me was Microsoft have got a patent out on tracing people through their bodily fluids. Now you have to say, well, there's no way they can trace you through your bodily fluids unless they've got something in you to trace you with. And then how do they do that? And then you start looking at 5G. And then you start talking to people like Mark Steele. And then all the plans all come together. So this is what we're coming together now as the Great Resist, to actually put all this under one roof. On the one hand, you've got the Great Reset and all of the people behind that. On the other side, you've got all of us who've done the research, know what is happening. And so many people in their own way have come up with all sorts of different small organizations or written letters where we all get together and we resist it across the world. The other thing that people don't talk about is agriculture. And unfortunately, this time we haven't got room, but I've been working with people across the world, and, they're trying to get rid of farming straight across the board, everywhere, including in this country. They're trying to move away. You're not going to be allowed to eat meat. You're going to end up eating bugs. You can only use all the fresh produce, etc. Look at what's happening in Holland at the moment. We've all got to come together, Alistair, and resist. And
Yeah.
it's frightening.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is for sure, and that is that there are more people who are. I don't like to use the phrase "waking up" because it's a bit corny, but um, there are more people who are beginning to ask questions. And as I also say, waking up's the easy bit. Getting out of bed is the difficult bit. And there are more people who are getting out of bed in that metaphorical sense and doing stuff. And you're certainly one of those people. And I'm also glad that you're bringing up stuff there like the dangers of losing our cash and converting everything to digital. And I'm seeing that more and more now, and going into some of the smaller superstores, and they've basically got all the machines are electronic. You can't even use cash in them, and there might be, well, you might still be able to use cash at the desk, but not for these automated machines. And that's really, really worrying, because a lot of people depend upon cash, especially people at the lower end of the income scale, who might be able to get a little bit of income, without declaring it, like doing jobs for people and getting a small pocket money that way. And I mean, there is a lot of people that depend upon cash payments because they simply don't have a job. They're not maybe capable of getting a job, and even if they had a job, they might not be that much better off. So I mean, cash is absolutely critical for a large number of people, and so if you stop them using cash, how are they going to survive?
Well, everybody needs to start using cash again. It's very easy, and I've been guilty of it. I'm sure you have, Alistair. We've got cards in our pocket. It's so easy, much easier than going to the bank and carrying a lot of cash around. So it is difficult though for many people, as you say, rural people. But it's quite interesting. If you go in, pretend you haven't noticed that you can only use a card. It's incredibly funny. You go to a branch and you fill up, and they say, we only take a card. And we say, well, that's terribly sad. I don't have a card. I only have cash. And you go to walk away and they say, well, get the police. They say, please do bring them. I've got legal tender. And you do that in a restaurant as well. It completely bamboozles them. But it's funny how they suddenly manage to take it. So I think we've all got to go back, even if we don't use it for large amounts, because sometimes that's difficult. The other thing, of course, is if you've got money in the bank, it doesn't belong to you. And this is what people don't understand, Alistair. When you put your money in the bank, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the bank. They can do with it what they will. And, you're a damn nuisance. And many people have said, when they've gone to get money out, the actual tellers now on the desk say, why do you want the money? Well, excuse me, what the hell has it got to do with you? But that is the question you're asked now, especially if you go into three figures. You can just about get away with it in two figures. You go for £100 or more, you get the cashier saying to you, why do you want the money? And, I have to say, I'm terribly sorry. It has got absolutely nothing to do with you. And I don't wish to be rude. I always say that. I don't wish to be rude. But, it's got nothing to do with you at all. But the sad thing is, of course, our pensions always go into the bank because, anybody that's a pensioner like myself, what else do you do? The frightening thing is if they then take control through digital currency, and then I've gone through a red light or I've called my MP a name that perhaps he doesn't like, I may be stopped from having the money that I have paid for all my life.
Well, we've seen them do that in Canada at the truckers' protest. That was another major wake-up call, that there's like, we don't actually like what you're campaigning about, so we're going to shut down your bank account and make you unable to transact or to receive donations or anything like that. I mean, the fact that they would actually do that to people in a Western world a Western country such as Canada. That was just utterly shocking to me, utterly shocking. And what was even more shocking was that our Prime Minister at the time, which would be Boris Johnson, had nothing to say about that. You know, he was meant to be this great figure of freedom and so on, but he didn't say to his fellow Prime Minister, "Oh, you shouldn't do that, Justin. That's a step too far." He didn't even murmur anything. Just complete silence. Neither did anybody else. And I thought, well, they're all in on it. They're all approving of that.
They're either all bought or thick or both, all of them.
Yes.
And that's the thing that we've somehow now. The Great Resist is not about moaning about what's going to happen. It's about putting things together now to stop it. So it's a very positive day. We'll have a lot of fun, believe me, because there's nothing. Is it Corporal Jones and Dad's Army? They don't like it up 'em, Captain Mannering. No, they don't. And, you know, I'm all for putting it up 'em, I'm saying. And when you get it up there, I think it's a twist, okay? Get it up there and twist. So there we go. So we'll have a great deal of fun. Anybody that's in Newport on the 24th of June, it's a £5 to come. We've got some terrific speakers, really terrific, great fun.
Brilliant.
I'm sorry you're not there, Alistair, but I know you're going to give us a video to support the day anyway. So
yes, thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and I won't be able to be there, but we will be busy fighting the good fight in Dundee on that particular day. Jill says that she's going to be there. Well, let me just see. I saw a message here from Jill. Sewell says, "Going will take minutes for any who want to know how it goes." Now that might have been the event tomorrow night that she's speaking about. Stuart says that he loves your Bourgogne clock. Very nice. Very nice.
I lived in France for a while. It's lovely.
Good. Now, I'm just going to read out. If people want to find more, there is a banner here that I'm just going to put up. And it's the Great Resist Conference. Now, I've converted it to a tiny URL. So it's tinyurl.com/37TPW7Y8. That's for the benefit of people who are listening on our podcast. And that will be on Saturday, the 24th of June, beginning in the morning. And it's in Newport in South Wales.
Anybody for tickets, Alistair, they just need to go onto the Neon Centre at Newport. They're only a £5, but as I say, we'll have a very, very positive day with some superb speakers, and we'll have a lot of fun as we go.
Good. Well, I wish you all the very best.
Thank you
for that, Liz, and I wish all your speakers the very best as well. I know you've got a great lineup there, and we'll push it between now and then as well. And I look forward to speaking with you in due course. So we'll say good night and all the best to you.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody, and thank you for listening.